Hello, everyone. My name is Tobias Buckell, and I'm giving a reading right now. If you are familiar with me, thank you very much for taking time out of your day and coming to digitally visit me. If you want to say hello, I have the Discord open here on my right on my other monitor, so I'll be able to answer questions and see what you're saying. I will try to give you a small reading and go ahead and then answer questions. Today, I'm going to be reading from a novel called The Musketress, which is something I just turned in Thursday morning at 7 a.m., which will be fun to see what people think when that eventually comes out, if the editor likes it. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Caribbean-born science fiction and fantasy author. I'm a Grenadian and lived in the US and British Virgin Islands for many years, as well as eventually ending up in Northwest Ohio, which is a strange place to end up from the Caribbean, but there you go. It's many circuitous turns of fate. So this is The Musketress. This is my latest novel, and I will just begin. 1. The Citadel. The gods say, "You shall not suffer a librarian to live." I knew those holy words, even as far from the center of the world as Nineveh was, but I truly didn't understand the weight of them until I saw the man in jagged brown and red patterned cloak, dragged by his bound hands across the sandy mud of the Afrique gate. 7 herders had him surrounded, and they yanked at the ropes they usually yoked their goats with. "Stop that," I shouted. The captured man's hair looked like a ragged bush. Clearly, he'd walked the waste for far too long. It bobbed in the air as he stumbled, as the herders ignored me and pulled at him. "They're a traveler," I yelled, and travelers deserved hospitality. They deserved to be treated like a treasured family member. So few of them ever came over the far horizon of sand that stretched all around Nineveh. We didn't want them to return to their own lands with stories about Nineveh's barbarity. As one of the daughters to the great musketeer of Nineveh, I had to make sure our actions represented the honor of our city and my father. My duty here was plain. "Leave him be," I said. "This is no traveler," a herdsman spat. The stranger pulled back against them and tried to stand. The herders yanked back on the 2 ropes around his neck to choke him until his eyes streamed with tears. Another herder jumped in between the ropes and hit the man in the chest with a heavy wooden crook. I heard the crack from a full street's width away as I walked toward the small crowd. "Stop that." I imitated my father's cold, hard voice. I tried to act as if the fact that my order would be followed was a foregone conclusion, just as he always did. But the small mob did not respond to me. "She said, 'Stop it,'" said Kira on my right. She stepped forward, her bright green robes cracked as she swept her hands free to point at the other 2 bodyguards following me. The herders paused to look over at us with a bit more attention, and their faces twisted with fear as they recognized Kira. "Guardian, we found him out by the eastern grazes," one of the herders said, raising his arms and backing away from the beaten captive. The other herdsman agreed. He dropped to his knees in front of me and held a bundle of fabric up towards us. "He tried to capture one of our goats. He carried this with him." Kira sliced the twine wrapped around the bundle with one of her long daggers and then slid it softly back into its leather sheath. "It's," one of the herders started. "A book," Kira said, loathing clear in her voice. She dropped it to the ground as if it had burned her hands. We all stepped back away from the paper that flapped in the wind as the pages rustled about, and I stared at it. It felt so wrong to just be standing in the middle of a street near something so forbidden. "Burn it," Kira ordered one of the guardians. "No!" The bound man lurched forward, dragging herders with him as he struggled to grab the book. Kira kicked him, a leather boot to the side of his desert-scoured face that knocked him clean out. One of the guardians knelt beside the book and snapped a flint until sparks showered the pages. The thin, symbol-marked paper flared up in the middle of the street, and black smoke curled up into the air between us all. Everyone moved back away from it, too scared to breathe in the ink-stained smoke. Kira looked relieved. "Stay here. Keep it burning until you see only ashes on the street," she ordered the guardian with the flint. "Lord Kira," the guardian stood up from the burning book and looked at me. "2 guardians must remain with Lilith at all times." "I'll be the second," Kira said. "This is my decision. I am the Lady of the Watch." Kira commanded the 100 guardians, but every single one of them knew who ruled Nineveh, and my father had ordered that 2 guardians would walk with me, always. I watched them I watched the conflict struggle across their faces until they surrendered to Kira. Yes, Lord. I can spare a guardian, I whispered to her. No, your father is right, she said. There are desperate people here, hungry, starving folk, and they would see you as an easy meal. One day, I'll ask my father whether it's him or you that truly rule Nineveh, I said from the corner of my mouth. And Kira paused, bit her lip, and then leaned close to me. That is not a joke, Lilith. Never repeat it around the guardians, and never, for my sake, ever say that around your father. All right, I will stop there because we, wait, how much? It's, we're going to 250, so I can keep going. I'm so sorry. Well, you are more a ruler than me, I said to her. These herders didn't stop beating that man when I said to. You'll learn to hold your authority in your voice yet, Kira promised me. She cupped my chin with her hand and kissed my forehead. The glazed clay beads woven through her tight curled hair clacked as she came so close to me, and the smell of sweet sand and oil filled the air between us. Besides, the man they captured is a bookist, a librarian, a profaner. They were right not to listen to you. There are higher laws than just our city's laws. There are godly laws, and every one of them is bound to follow those, no matter where we live or who we are. And that law says he must be put to death. Of course, I agreed. And I wondered if Kira, who had carried me on her side before I could walk, could hear the lie in the tremor of my voice. It just didn't feel right to harm a defenseless man. I loved Kira like the sun and the moon, but the way she so easily talked about killing another person blew a confusing flurry of feelings all through me. Worry, fear, and a small handful of revulsion that then made me feel shame, as Kira was one of the most trusted people in all the Citadel, my teacher, and who was I to doubt her? Kira grabbed my shoulder gently. You're a good person, Lilith, but you have to let go of your feelings about this. Society requires us to punish criminals. You can't let your dog root around in the trash barrel, or soon your house will be that barrel. I know this won't be easy, but this is important. She'd said the same thing to me before a flogging once. She'd made me watch the woman's bare back bleed as the price for thievery. We'll strangle him right here on the street. The herders can take the body back out into the waste, Kira announced as she stepped back from me. I didn't have Kira's presence. I couldn't make pronouncements or calmly tell people what they were going to do in such a way that they felt compelled to do it. But I had some skills in turning people to my will. My mind had raced furiously to find a way out of this situation. And I said, Kira, you're right. The stranger is a librarian, certainly a book lover. There's a higher justice he has to face, death. But this is Nineveh, not the wastelands out beyond the 5 gates. And the one who decides how you die is my father, not you. Kira stopped in place and then turned back to me. She spread her arms, acknowledging the point, but I could see her jaw clench. You are of course correct, Musketress, she said. I'd annoyed her. She always used that formal title when she was angry, but she couldn't disagree with what I'd said out loud. We'll take him back to the Citadel, I said, and let the musketeer of Nineveh himself judge the stranger's death. It is the right thing. I kept the nervousness from my voice. As a child, when I challenged Kira, she would throw me into the dust when we trained later to pay me back. The bruises would turn a slow purple over the next few days, a reminder to me of the cost I paid for obstinance. Kira would find other ways to torment me, probably night duty on the walls, cleaning details, always a consequence that I couldn't really complain about to my father when I angered her, and I knew Kira would not let this go easily. But what a shame it would be if the man died before he told us where he came from, what he was doing crossing the wastelands when it had been almost a full generation since we'd last seen a visitor in Nineveh. And what was he doing risking holy wrath by protecting books? I couldn't help my curiosity. I never could. Kira finally nodded. She was bound to my father, and Kira, more than anyone else, respected the rules, the godly rules, and the hierarchy of Nineveh. Of course, that is the right thing, Musketress. You, pull him to his feet and bring him with us. I let out a deep breath. Kira shoved past me and muttered, all you're doing is delaying the inevitable. You're going to make this so much harder on yourself. And she was right. I stood against the will of the gods by trying to delay the stranger's death, a dangerous thing to do. But surely the gods could look into my heart and see that I didn't want blood on my hands. And if I stood by and watched a man killed before me, who was I? But there was also something else. I knew something that Kira did not. There was a room deep in the Citadel, hidden from even Kira. Every moment of the day, my 12 siblings, the only people in Nineveh other than my father, are allowed to be called musketeers or musketresses, guarded that room. There, chained behind a heavy metal door and sealed with a lock the size of my fist, my father had a book. All right, so that's the first little opening section of The Musketress. This is a novel that I just now finished writing, and I'm free for any questions you might have, and I've got the Discord open on the right, and I can see you if you ask something. What is the context of the novel? Can I say a little bit more about it? Part of the fun for me is that the context gets slowly unraveled as you read it further and further. So I've actually been trying not to tell people much about the context so that they can just sort of experience it and see where that goes. But basically, I'm doing, I don't know. This was a fun novel to write. It's an experiment for me because individuals have listened to the idea for it and said it's utterly a really niche, strange idea. But Audible.com really liked the proposal I sent them for it, and they're reading it right now, but they went ahead and gave me an offer and asked me to write it based on the proposal I sent them and this opening section that I read to you. So, hopefully I can preserve a little bit of mystery so that people can enjoy finding out what exactly the heck is going on here. Hopefully that was enough of a sampler to whet your appetite. Do I have any say in the voice artists? Technically we do not have say in the voice artists, but Audible has always been really nice to me and worked with me because, at one point, my first set of adventure novels, Crystal Rain, Ragamuffin, Sly Mongoose, all have Caribbean dialect and Caribbean peoples in them. And the first attempt to do audio versions of that by another publisher back in 2007, they had an individual, a white dude from Minnesota do the narration who tried to do some kind of like weird Ebonics. And it was really problematic. So when I got the rights back, I took them to Audible and I said, with my writing, it's really important that we kind of get the reader right with stuff like this. So they went and found Robin Miles, who comes from a Caribbean family, and went ahead and did a really wonderful job reading them. So in this case, I have this really great relationship with Audible. And I'm hoping that, they'll probably run some people by me and see what they think. And as far as Audible, they don't do commissions, but they have Audible Originals. And the Audible Original is something where you get your 1 credit a month, and I hoard them so that I have 2 or 3 credits. So sometimes I can go on a little spree. But there are also Audible Originals now that they email you. And so there'll be 6 or 7 books every month that you can choose to download for free. And the idea is that this would be an Audible Original. This is going to be one of the free books that you can download if you have an Audible account. So that's kind of exciting for me. Ken asked, is this a standalone or is it considered to take place in one of your other locales or books? No, this is completely out of nowhere. It's a really strange new setting that I came up with and a strange new conceit. It follows some of the crazy things I'm always interested in. This story, I was really interested in sort of the, there's a concept called, let me see if I get this title right. There's a concept called, and I have notes about it, euhemerism, euhemerism, which is the idea that the mythology that comes down to us is often is believed by euherimists to be sparked by real events, right? So you can see a king named in the Babylonian tablets and who signs it with a name. And then you can see, 500 years later, Babylonian stories referring to that person as kind of like a god. And so those things fascinate me. And so I love the sort of lost mythologies of stuff where you kind of go far into the future and you look back at our era through the lens of mythology and pieces of what's left and what makes it through. So in this case, I was playing with a little bit of that concept. I wanted to create kind of a far future mythology feeling piece, kind of like, oh, I'm blanking on the author's name, but oh goodness. Well, can't come up with the name, so. Other questions? I think we've got 6 more minutes and I'm happy to prattle on. Nice setup on the shelves behind me. Yeah, it's all fake. This is a green screen. Here, look at a peek behind reality. I see some people typing, so I'm just kind of like giving you all this dead space. All right, someone said that they would love to teach your works in a semester-long course. If I was going to have to teach one author for semester, who would I teach? Who would I teach? That's a really good question. I would probably grab, that's such a good question. I mean, like, I always feel like who's your favorite author is like this like landmine that I can step on. I really like, there's a difference between people I would like and people who I think would have a lot of interesting things that you can dig into. So you'd want to find someone like, probably want to find someone like an Ursula K. Le Guin. Like that would give you a lot of material to kind of dig through, or an Octavia Butler, right? You know, something that has just a lot of depth that you can kind of like go through all the different layers. And you've got sort of like entertaining story, but you've also got like, you know, social commentary, characters that are going to be very different from most of the students, concepts that they probably wouldn't have been exposed to. You know, like anarchism, the sort of gentle anarchism in Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia Butler's sort of ecological post-apocalyptic collapse with, crazy Trumpian leaders would be kind of like something that you could tie in and get students to realize the resonance with today on. I think those would be the two that pop to mind, but that's just thinking about it off the top of my head. Okay, I see some people typing. So yeah, the Muscatress was a lot of fun because I ran it by some industry professionals who recommended that I not write it because it was sort of like not easy to apply market tags to. And after 5 or 7 years, I've had this idea in the back of my head, this opening scene I just read to you, and another what I call candy bar scene that's about 2/3 of the way through. And I just kept adding more thoughts to it over the years in little notebooks and couldn't get it out of my head. And I finally decided that I would write it as a novella and approached Audible to see if there was anything they wanted to do in terms of like, you know, collaborating on something like that. Because Steve one of the editors there had reached out to me and asked if he could get a novella from me. So I showed him this idea and said, hey, why don't I write a novella with this? So I took all the ideas I had for the book and I kind of was like, okay, if I scrunch them down into here and drop them, I could maybe create a novella, you know, with a little bit more pairing. And they looked at the proposal and they got back to me and they're like, you know, I suspect that you could pull this out into a novel. And my agent and I said, you know, funny you should say so. So this is one of those weird projects that's completely a passion project. I just did it because I've carried the idea for 7 years, and now it's out and it doesn't have to be in my head anymore, which is kind of exciting. And you know, as far as like how people are going to react, I have no idea. Like it's no idea. But I really enjoyed being in the world. This is also an interesting project because I usually work with incredibly detailed outlines. I have a post up on my website called I wrote a 20,000 word outline to write my latest book. And in this book, I actually just wrote it without an outline. I just had a number of particular scenes and just 7 years of thinking about the universe it was set in. And so I basically felt by this point that it was just like, yeah, all I have to do is just kind of spend the time with it and it'll resolve itself because it's all up there. What other things do I have in the pipeline? You know, it's the time of COVID. So it's really weird. I have like 3 other novels that are kind of floating around the industry, and there have been no nibbles. One of my most favorite novels ever that has a crazy 10-year story behind it. It was written, it was rewritten. Middle grade publishers and YA publishers just would not touch it. It's about a young Caribbean boy who goes to outer space on kind of an adventure. It's like, imagine if Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the Chocolate Factory was a starship that arrives on Earth, and the little kid Charlie Bucket is really a St. Thomian kid from the Virgin Islands. But good Lord, people just bounce off of it in YA because they want me to stay in the Virgin Islands. Because it's like, can you show us more of the suffering of the people who live in the projects of the Virgin Islands? Because we've all seen like Starship Adventures, but I was like, but we've never seen a St. Thomian boy go to outer space. So that's kind of what I was about. It's still out there. I still haven't been able to sell it. It briefly was at another publisher. They took too long to publish it, and some other things happened that were unfortunate. So I pulled it back, and now I'm trying to find someone else. There's another fantasy novel that I wrote with Dave Kletcha that's out and floating around, and a short story collection. And it's kind of a weird time. I mean, there's a small chance at some point in the next 6 months I could be selling 4 completely already written books that will be coming out over the next years, or we could all be